Hi, this is Peter from Anatomy Zone, and in this tutorial we're going to take a look at the anatomy of the sympathetic nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system is split into the parasympathetic and sympathetic divisions. The sympathetic nervous system is often associated with the fight or flight response, and its main role is to respond to physical stresses on the body. This tutorial follows on from the previous tutorial I did on the basic aspects of the autonomic nervous system. To quickly recap the important points, we saw how the efferent component of the autonomic nervous system was different to the somatic nervous system, as there is a two-neuron sequence connecting the central nervous system to the peripheral nervous system, whereas in the somatic nervous system there is a single neuron. This two-neuron sequence involves a preganglionic neuron and a postganglionic neuron. So let's just take a look at some of the anatomical aspects of the sympathetic nervous system. We'll begin by taking a look at the efferent outflow. So the efferent sympathetic outflow originates in the lateral horn of the spinal cord from segments T1 to L2. The preganglionic neuron exits the spinal cord via the ventral horn, much like in the somatic nervous system where the motor neuron exits via the ventral horn. And then on either side of the vertebral column, you've got something which is known as the sympathetic trunk. This is a chain of ganglia which extends from the base of the skull to the coccyx. So remember that ganglia are collections of neuronal cell bodies that lie outside the central nervous system. So these ganglia are the sympathetic ganglia, and they're referred to as paravertebral ganglia as they lie on either side of the vertebral column. What we know from previous anatomy is that we've got the dorsal root carrying the sensory information into the spinal cord, and we've got the ventral root carrying the efferent motor information. And we also know that this bulge here is the dorsal root ganglion, and we've got the spinal nerve over here with the dorsal ramus and the ventral ramus. Now you can see that we have a few new structures over here. We've got these two branches leaving the ventral ramus, the white ramus communicans and the grey ramus communicans, connecting to the sympathetic ganglion, which is a part of the sympathetic trunk that I showed you earlier. So the neuron leaving the spinal cord enters the sympathetic ganglion through this white ramus. It's called white because the preganglionic fibre is myelinated. Some of the preganglionic fibres form a synapse with the postganglionic neurons within the sympathetic ganglion, and then they leave through the grey ramus, and it's called grey because it's unmyelinated. The postganglionic neuron leaving via the grey ramus then joins back to the spinal nerve, and it follows the spinal nerve to supply its target organ. So I've introduced you to some new structures here, but things get a little bit more complicated. We've looked at one configuration whereby the preganglionic nerve enters the ganglion, synapses and leaves through the grey ramus to join the spinal nerve, but there are actually other things that can happen. So remember that the sympathetic outflow is from T1 to L2. So you've got regions above and below this where the preganglionic neurons can ascend or descend to. So for example, the sympathetic fibres which supply the head and neck ascend to the cervical ganglia and can from there supply the head and neck structures. And then you've got some autonomic fibres that have their own nerves. They don't join the spinal nerves. So autonomic fibres that travel within their own nerve are known as splanchnic nerves. So you've got some preganglionic fibres which synapse in the sympathetic ganglion, like I showed you before, and then the postganglionic neuron doesn't leave via the grey ramus and enter into the spinal nerve. It actually leaves by its own nerve. And then you've also got some preganglionic fibres which bypass the sympathetic ganglion completely. It doesn't form any synapse in this sympathetic ganglion. It actually leaves directly without forming a synapse and synapses in a peripheral ganglion near the target organ. So we've got four different configurations in this sense. We've got some preganglionic fibres which synapse at the same level. They enter via the white ramus, synapse in the sympathetic ganglion, leave via the grey ramus to join the spinal nerve. Then we've got those preganglionic fibres that ascend or descend to synapse at a different level. And then we've got some fibres which have their own nerves. They have splanchnic nerves. And we've got two types. We've got ones that synapse in the sympathetic ganglion and then have a postganglionic neuron which leaves by its own nerve. And then we've also got preganglionic neurons which bypass the ganglion completely to form a synapse in a peripheral ganglion. So in the next tutorial we'll take a look at examples of how these different configurations are found in the body, and we'll look at the different distributions of the sympathetic fibers.